we can see here in this room there is no lack of creativity, ingenuity in America. We have the really creative people here. But each year thousands of new products are invented, but many of them never receive any patents or get any licensing agreements. And knowing how to use technology and how to be creative doesn't mean you know how to manufacture it and get it to market. That's the key thing. So getting started, you need to recognize your limitations, what you know how to do, and what you're going to need to hire somebody else to do, and what expertise you have, and what you need to get somebody else to do. You need to use the experts in fields that you don't have, such as product design and engineering, patent licensing, material selection, prototyping, which we've certainly discussed tonight, production manufacturing, and marketing. There's many ways to make a part to manufacture. And if you are an existing company and you have the equipment to do a new product, you may be able to do much of it yourself. But the days of fully integrated manufacturers that do everything from beginning to end is pretty much over with. Even, you know, it started out that the automotive companies had everything integrated in-house, and then they subbed out because the cost of equipment is so expensive. Like to set up a sheet metal fabrication company requires about $1 million because the equipment is very expensive. Where you can set up a small garage shop, kind of machine shop, for maybe $100,000 if you're buying used equipment. So companies can't afford anymore to have all the kinds of equipment that they need to have to manufacture parts. So, you know, we can have vendors that just make specific parts or sub-assemblies that you assemble then in your plant, or you can hire it out to a contract manufacturer and they will do the purchasing of the sub-assemblies and parts and put the product together. There's even companies that I call that are virtual companies where they have come up with a concept for a product, but they don't even know how to design it, so they hire designing done by an engineer and consulting firm, and then that engineering consulting firm works with them to select all the different manufacturing processes and have a turnkey manufacturer to produce it and even drop ship it and conduct some of the marketing. So there's so many ways you can do a product. There's many ways to make specific parts. You know, in plastic we saw there's machine, vacuum and pressure formed, blow molded, injection molded, rotational molded. I've got some samples here, like this is a rotational molded part. This is a toy for horses. They can pick it up with their mouth and they can play with it. They even have one that's green that's apple scented. So this, if you have a hollow part or you have a part that's going to be plastic with pretty thick walls and it's going to be on the large size, this is the way you can make a part, because you can make a part that's actually 4 foot wide by 18 foot long using rotational molding. So there's so many different ways that you can have to manufacture parts. And then, you know, composite. A lot of aircraft parts are what's called composite, where it can either be layers of composite material that are bonded together, and a lot of aircraft parts are made that way, or they're spun rotation molded, which is what your golf club shafts are. We have rubber, and there's so many different ways. You can have dipped rubber parts. That's the way a lot of the gloves are made, the rubber gloves. Cast urethane and cast RTV silicone, transfer molded, compression molded, injection molded, or even liquid injection molded, where the rubber is actually liquefied. So those are some of the ways rubber parts can be made. Then metal. You have basic machine parts. You can have fabricated from sheet metal, which is a very common way to make a lot of chassis and housings for electronic equipment and for military applications, telecommunications equipment, because of the RFI and EMI shielding benefits of metal. Then you can have stamped, and I have the stamped part in here. So a couple of different ones. When you look at a thin metal part, you could start out having this done by either machining, which would be very expensive because you're machining away a lot of material. You could have done by chemical etching if the material is thin enough, so you won't get too much of a difference on the edge. And then you could also have it done by stamping, and there's 3 different levels of stamping. You have short run stampings with very low cost tooling starting at about $500 on up to a few thousand. You have progressive die stamping, where if you have a complex part and it's got different bends and forms, you could have it done as a progressive die stamping. And then really high volume metal parts that are smaller are done by what's called a brooder piece of stamping equipment, and it just spits them out every few seconds, and really is the tooling is expensive, but the piece price is in pennies. So those are some of the ways you can have different fabrication, where it's made from a sheet metal shop, which is made on an Amada turret press, and that stamps out the part like a, in stages, where it stamps it one feature and then it does another feature and another feature on a turret press. So those are some of the things that we have. Deep drawn for parts that have, depth to them, or hydroform, which is used in a lot of aerospace projects. I've sold all the different ways of making castings: sand, permanent mold, investment casting, rubber process mold casting, V process, and die casting. Then you have weldments, which is a lot of metal bars and tubular material that's welded together in different shapes. A lot of carts used in the medical industry, and a lot of things like that are made with, weldments of bar stock and tubular stock. And then you have electroforming. So those are some of the ways metal parts can be made in production. So there's many variables to select the right manufacturing process. What is the environment that your part is going to be used in, your product? What is it going to be in an industry or a home, or out in the desert, or a marine application, aerospace application? These are all the variables that you need to know to be able to select the right material for your process. And are you going to have any certifications for your product? FDA or UL or mil-spec for a military application. And of course, the big thing is, what kind of production volume do you expect to have? Are you going to just have a high dollar product where you're going to make maybe 100 a year, or are you going to have a low dollar product where you're hoping to be able to make $500,000 a year? So those are the variables you need to know to be able to select the right manufacturing process. And you can start simple and work up as your volume increases for your product, because it's hard to decide. And the rapid prototyping we saw tonight is an excellent way to get started, and the technologies have really changed over the last 20 years. I've been a sales rep now for 30 years and sold about every way to manufacture a product in a production way, but I've never represented a rapid prototyping company, because there's no repeat. Don't make enough money to make it worth my time to do it. So additive manufacturing, as we talked about tonight. Now, these fused deposition modeling and the laser sintering, they're actually now making very large molds and parts. You can actually make injection molded tooling now by laser sintering. And that's one way to get very rapid tooling done, is by this laser sintering. And there's a very heavy investment on the part of the federal government. They've just now set up an additive manufacturing center, and they will be really focusing on the R&D development to develop larger parts, especially for the military and aerospace and applications, because the quantity is so low on these kind of products for the government that it's going to be more cost effective to be able to make larger parts using these new additive manufacturing processes. We have a very competitive global marketplace. Manufacturers have to continually reduce their costs to be globally competitive. And unfortunately, that's one of the big reasons we have so much manufacturing that has gone offshore to Asia in particular. Cost is one of the key factors to be able to be competitive. So the problem is that, most entrepreneurs and most companies don't look at what the total cost is. They design a part, they get a quote, and they pick the vendor based totally on the lowest price. Whether it's lowest price for the tooling or a combination of lower price for the piece price and the tooling. But they don't take into consideration all the other variables that are going to have a big impact later on in your production and also the success of your product. You really need to understand that, you know, what is involved. And offshoring can mean whether you are using a vendor just to make one part or you're using a vendor to make a whole product. The danger of having a vendor to make a whole product, especially in China, is they are very good at copying and and selling your product on the counterfeit market, or because they don't honor our patents. So if you are sourcing a whole product with one vendor in an offshore country, you are at risk for having a competitive product come out on the market to compete against yours within 6 months to a year. So that's a factor you need to think about. Well, you need to take into consideration understanding what is total cost of ownership. This term was originated by the Gartner Group, and it means a combination of the direct and indirect costs of producing a product. And it should include such things as, besides the purchase price of the part, it should include also geographical location of your vendor. How close are they going to be to you? How easily will it be to work with them if you have design changes like this, Grow It company? They're close by, you can visit them, you can get a part done in 3 days to make your prototypes. Versus China, and it's going to take weeks unless they ship it air express. It's going to take weeks to get to you. You have to have what transportation methods are going to be used. Locally in the United States, we have so many different ways you can transport products, whereas production quantities from China are coming on the slow boat from China, which takes an average of 4 to 6 weeks. Plus, you have to have the cost of the quality controls. Are you going to get parts from offshore that you're going to be able to use, or are you going to get parts that don't meet your specifications and you'll reject? Because China does not take rejected parts back and give credit. And I just got an RFQ today from somebody that's having a very simple part made in China, and it's cracking. It's a acrylic plastic part, and it's cracking, and the Chinese vendor will not take the parts back. So, you're saving money to begin with, but then what's the cost of your quality if you can't use the parts and you have to have them made over? And then the reserve capacity of your vendor. Are they going to be able to ramp up to the higher volumes you have? Or if your sales don't meet your projections, are they going to be willing to scale back down to make lower quantities? Or are they going to have a minimum quantity level that you have to buy to achieve that price point that they've quoted to you? And then you have to have the responsiveness. Are they going to be responsive to your technology needs to be able to make the design changes and understand the end use of your product, to be able to understand the best way to make a quality part? And also, do they have the technological depth to be able to understand the materials that you've requested and whether they're going to meet your specifications? So you really need to be looking at all these factors when you select a vendor. So again, this is total cost of ownership. So the search for low-cost manufacturing areas is not new. 50, 60 years ago, it was New England manufacturers moving down to the lower wage, states in the South that also weren't unionized. So that was the first thing. About 25 years ago, it was companies going to Taiwan, Hong Kong, Singapore, Philippines to get lower manufacturing costs. And then when China got the most favored nation status in 2001, a lot of manufacturing has gone over to China, and now Thailand and Vietnam, because of actually China is actually shifting the high labor, low cost parts to Vietnam, and because they want to move up the supply chain and do higher quality parts and have higher dollar value for their exports to the United States. So the decision to outsource is often made just on the piece price. and they don't take into these other considerations. So the faulty assumptions that many people, major companies have, is that overseas suppliers will have the same morals and ethics that we have, that longer lead times won't affect our costs, that overseas laws are going to protect our intellectual property, and they don't, that we can teach the suppliers to meet our quality needs, and that's going to be difficult. Communication won't be a problem because we have Skype, we have the internet, we can talk to people. But do you realize, you're going to have somebody having to get up in the middle of the night and talk to somebody in China because it's the next day? So those are some of the problems. Or you have to pay to send somebody over to China to handle problems. In the past, I've lost orders. There were, for say a year's worth of parts for $1,000 to $2,500. Well, one trip to China will more than eat that up because it's $1,000 one way right now, and maybe going up with fuel costs going up. And then you have to have increase in quality and delivery costs to be able to get the quality you need. And they often think that, well, we can teach lean, manufacturing processes to our vendors, and they're a long way from lean over there at the cost of labor. But the new statistics I've heard now is that Mexico is now pretty much equal to the cost. A fully burdened labor cost in China is now being equaled by Mexico. So I just got that information from a contract manufacturer last Friday. So case studies show that these assumptions are faulty. And here's what really happens. You have variation. Each lot takes longer than you expect it to. Methods for producing products have gotten more complex, not simpler. Your company doesn't even know, and I'm talking about companies that are in existence, not just entrepreneurs and inventors. They don't even know all the hidden costs of doing business offshore, and that a company loses complete control of the quality and the responsiveness to their customers. So accountants measure hard costs, but they don't often measure intangible soft costs. And these costs are often called hidden factories because nobody's aware of them, and they also really don't measure anything that's of tangible or measurable value. So the hidden factories that produce these soft costs are actually like costs of quality, loss of goodwill, loss of competitiveness, extended warranty costs, and also legal costs for fighting a company that has counterfeited your product. And the extended warranty cost could be that you have a warranty on your product, and say you reject that product and that Chinese vendor decides to sell it on the black market, and somebody buys it and they see the name of your company on the product, they expect you to honor the warranty costs even though it came from a counterfeit source. So those are some of the things that have really happened. I've read those case studies. So here are some of the hidden costs of doing business offshore. You have currency fluctuations. We know that the value of the dollar is up and down compared to the value of the yen. We have design changes. That's a cost of that. We have quality problems, legal problems, intellectual property theft, travel expenses, lead time and effort to make the transition from manufacturing it here to moving it overseas, and also poor communication, and the cost of inventory, because there's usually a larger lot size that you have to buy from China to get that low price. Well, you have to store that. You have to stock that product. So that's a cost to you to stocking that product, and especially when you're a company and you have to stock a lot of different parts. Business came back for one company here in up in Fallbrook simply because they were getting welded, sheet metal fabricated housings that were being powder coated white because their product was a dental lab product. Well, they had to, stock these. They were about as big as this in size, but they were higher. They were about this high. And so that took a lot of room to stock fully assembled, powder-coated housings that they were buying from China, and when they calculated all these different hidden costs of the cost of the inventory, the cost of the space, the cost of the quality problems, because if something got, chipped in shipping here, that had to be stripped and powder coated again. So the cost of the quality wound up not saving them any money, and they brought all the products back to the United States. So once manufacturing went to China for a long time, we just didn't get it back. It just stayed there, and we lost one thing after another over the last 15 years. But about 4 years ago, we started getting some things back because the quality problems especially, and some of the higher costs. Because one of the first things we got back from one of my customers was an injection molded assembly part that was supposed to be 30% glass filled, and it came in smaller than it was supposed to be. Well, it turned out when they had it tested by an independent lab, it was only 10% glass filled. So it shrunk more than it was supposed to, making a smaller part. Now this was really critical because this part was for a miniature underwater vehicle, so it was going down about 1,500 meters, and it wasn't going to withstand the pressure at that depth, being only 10% glass filled. So they brought all their tooling back and are having their injection mold parts made now here by a domestic manufacturer. So we have, these, well, go back a little bit, let's see. And we have substitution materials. Again, that's one of the major problems. Inconsistent or poor quality, like that cracking plastic acrylic part I mentioned. Stretched out deliveries, communication problems, and inability to modify designs easily and rapidly, and unfavorable purchase order terms. And one of the most unfavorable is that you often have, if you're a small company in particular, you have to pay for the parts when they ship before you get them, and no returns on rejected parts. So that can really kill you financially. So, intellectual property theft. China does not honor our patents, and here's some examples of what we have had as counterfeit with the prime example, the mini one that looks identical to Apple's iPhone but costs half as much. The Chinese Cherry Q, called the Avio in US, it's a part-by-part clone of the Chevy Spark, costing nearly half as much. So those are some real examples of what's happened, and I could probably find you 100 more. So quality problems. Here's what one of the people that deals with offshore a lot was David Dayton of Silk Road. They're an international procurement and project management company. He said, if you have received a product and paid for it, it's too late to be finding problems. He recommends that you not allow a product to ship before you approve it, which means you would have to have somebody source inspect that part. You would have to pay for somebody to go, or pay for a person in China to do that for you, to inspect the parts before they're shipped, so that you can reject the parts there instead of getting them here where you can't return them. So there is a growing realization now that you get what you pay for, and that the quality problems and the hidden costs are getting more and more difficult to control, and that things are changing. So there is a lack of the education for producing quality in China, and so that's one of the things that's happening. Supply chain dynamics are changing. The component material prices are going up. Labor rates have been rising 15 to 20% year over year for the last 4 years. So we have transportation costs increasing because of the higher cost of fuel. And another factor is that during our big depth of our recession worldwide, many of the shipping companies almost went out of business because the work dropped so much that the shipping companies, they cut down the number of routes, and they cut down the number of ships per route. And it has never been built back up to what it was before the recession of 2009. So we are still functioning with fewer ships and fewer routes, so it is taking longer for products to get here. We have political instability. We've seen a lot of, labor unrest in China now in the last year and a half to 2 years. We have, natural disasters like the Japan earthquake and the tsunami. And then we have a declining U.S. dollar, which means it's not as economical. You aren't saving as much money now as you were in China because the U.S. dollar is now weakening, so our products are costing less on the world market. So sourcing is gradually moving home. About 20% of companies brought back work in 2009, of which 59% reshored. And probably a good number of them have gone to Mexico because Mexico really got hurt in the recession of 2001 and 2, and a lot of maquiladoras closed. And then they got hurt again in the recession of 2009. But now it's a burgeoning industry again, and a lot of the companies are actually coming and setting up manufacturing in Mexico. So that previously in the 1990s, we had a lot of Japanese and Korean companies come and set up plants in Baja. And now it's actually some Chinese companies that are setting up manufacturing in China, down in Mexico. So, recent survey of North American manufacturing executives said that 61% are considering shifting from offshore to closer to centers of demand. 59% intend to pursue new supply options. 67% feel that the proximity to their customers is more important than where they have the manufacturing done. And 57% noted that the cost of logistics, meaning and transportation costs, are increasing and influencing them to be located here. Manufacturing is expected to return to America. According to the Boston Consulting Group report in 2010 or 2011, we expect net labor costs for manufacturing in China and the U.S. to converge by around 2015. That's only a little over 2.5 years from now. Now, that's not going to be every part of the United States. It's going to be the lower wage states in the South when that happens. But we are getting back things even to the more expensive states like Minnesota and Massachusetts and New York and Illinois. So labor cost, if your part has less than 30% labor involved with it, you should not even think of going to China because you are not going to save enough money. It has to be more labor intensive than 30%. So, the reshoring initiative, there's actually an initiative started by Harry Moser, 2010. He's the past president, chairman of an equipment company called GFAG Charmy, and he started the reshoring initiative. It's now a nonprofit organization and has about 25 different organization sponsors. And here's his information. And his purpose is to change the mindset from offshore is cheaper to local reduces the total cost of ownership. He's trying to train original equipment manufacturers on how to source local and use his TCO calculator. He actually has a worksheet calculator to quantify those hidden costs of doing business offshore in a lot of variables. So he has this online library. He's been in every kind of major news media. He's given 110 presentations per year the last 2 years. And there's regional initiatives like the Illinois Reshoring Initiative. So he's got this estimator, and it's got 29 cost factors that in pull-down menus that you can calculate all these hidden costs of doing business offshore. I give a more thorough explanation of this because Harry's trained me in how to use the total cost of ownership worksheet calculator, and I'm now an authorized speaker for the Reshoring Initiative. It's easy to use and it's free, and he will provide you with information if you call him and talk to him. He'll help you. So here's what his worksheet calculator can do. It can show you the cost now, and we're projected 5 years, so you can see what it's going to cost in 5 years compared to U.S. costs versus China costs. So you can compare to see whether it's going to be less expensive or more expensive to produce in the United States or China. So here's an example of a recent company, just a story I got from a plant tour we had last month, Solatube International. They were late in moving to China. They moved manufacturing to China in 2008. They had a goal of not just manufacturing in China, but also selling their products to China for the, their products of solar, lighting systems. Well, they have a very complex manufacturing process, and they have a proprietary process for laminating their metal material to form the tubes. Well, they had quality problems, and there were the hidden costs of doing business. But the big thing was that they located in an enterprise zone, which had a real advantage for exporting parts back to the United States, but a real disadvantage for trying to sell products into China. And they wound up actually having to move out of the enterprise zone and set up a manufacturing center outside of the enterprise zone to be able to sell their products in China. They wound up making the decision to bring their products back to the United States at the end of last year, and they now have all the manufacturing processes back here in the United States, which is protecting their intellectual property of their proprietary process for their material. So they're even beginning to make LED lights here at their plant in Vista. So that's an example. And here's some of the advantages of doing business here. Obviously, ease of communication, same language, flexible delivery. You can get just-in-time delivery, Kanban delivery for your products, reliable transportation, smoother design changes, lower cost of inventory, higher quality parts that made in the right materials, meeting your specifications, lower travel expenses to visit your vendors, and no intellectual property infringement, and more favorable purchase order terms, because most manufacturers in the United States have terms from net 30 or net 45, and some will even accept net 60. So those are some of the things that outsourcing will continue, and we see major companies still setting up plants in China. But right now, Harry Mosier says that within the last 2 years, about 10% of manufacturing has come back from the reshoring initiative, creating about 50,000 jobs. His goal is to reduce or bring back enough jobs to replace about half the jobs we've lost in the last 12 years. We've lost over 5.5 million manufacturing jobs since the year 2000, and that is a big reason for our national and state budget deficits, because people working in manufacturing jobs are earning higher wages and paying taxes. People who are not working are costing the government money in the form of unemployment, unemployment food stamps and Medicaid. So we could get rid of a lot of our federal budget deficit if we would bring more manufacturing back to the United States. And that is my crusade to do, and that's what I spend my time writing about, is saving and restoring and revitalizing American manufacturing so we can have a vibrant, strong middle class again.
Thanks for that.